Hi everyone and welcome to our webinar. Let's start by some introductions. I'll introduce myself. My name is John Harrison. I'm one of the Senior Solutions Architects here at Idera. I also work primarily with our ERStudio product range and have been doing so for quite a number of years now. Just a few logistics about the webinar today. First thing is, as you may have noticed, we're using GoToWebinar as our presentation software. This does allow you to submit questions into the question area. This is a live webinar, so we'll try and answer those questions as we go along. I've got a couple of colleagues sitting in as well, so between us, I'm sure we'll be able to address most things. And we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end if there's some others that are still outstanding. I have uploaded the presentation and slides that we're going to go through as a handout in the resource area on GoToWebinar, so you should be able to download that at any point during the session today. And the session is also being recorded, so the recording, once we finish, you'll be receiving a follow-up email, and that'll have a link in for you to rewatch the recording if there's any part that you missed or wanted to review. Then we'll provide some contact details as well at the end with a QR code and other ways of getting in touch. So let's just take a look at the agenda. I'm going to start just by giving a very quick introduction and overview of the ERStudio Enterprise itself. We've probably got a mix of people on here. Some of you may have used the ERStudio extensively, some are maybe a little bit newer to it. So I'll just quickly outline some of the main things to be aware of. Then really the focus of today is around the different options we have in the ERStudio Enterprise for importing metadata. I'm going to go through a number of those. We're going to go off and start with how we can connect directly to data sources, in particular databases, and reverse engineer information. I'll also talk about the way in which we can actually do a direct import of a SQL file or other standards like a JSON file. Probably spend most of the time examining a few of the different MetaWizard bridges that we have as options. And again, I'll explain those as we go through. And the final area that we'll just touch on is macros. And I think finally, assuming we've got a bit of time here, I think it's always good and important to also look at how some of this information that you collect in the form of metadata can be published and shared across your organization as well. So we'll spend just a couple of moments talking about some options for doing that. Okay. So quick introduction and overview of ERStudio Enterprise. So ERStudio is our enterprise data modeling solution here at Idera, and it's actually made up of a number of different components. I'm going to build up this slide here actually, and then we'll talk through it. On the left-hand side, we have something that we call ERStudio Data Architect. This is the modeling tool itself, and this is what we'll be using primarily today. This allows us to actually build the data models, and of course this is how we can also make connections to various different sources in different ways to import that metadata in and start looking at how we can understand, document and reuse it. ERStudio does also provide a couple of should we call them back-end services, which are very important when you're working in more of a team environment. So we have a team server repository, which enables us to have multiple people working on the data models. They can share them effectively. It will do version control of the models and so on. And then the final part on the right is really an extension to the repository that we call Team Server Core. And this allows us to actually extend and generate HTML-based information from the data models. So it can then be shared with a much wider audience, different roles across the organization for people who maybe aren't going to be working on the data models, but it might be useful for them to be able to see and understand structures or search for specific information. There's also some other more custom integrations that we've built and provide as well. As the needs of data modelers and the data governance departments within organizations are maturing and maybe coming a bit closer together. And the idea of linking some of this information we gather in the data model in the form of technical metadata back to things which are a bit more business related in terms of business glossaries, business terms, using solutions like Microsoft Purview or Calibra also becomes important. So again, we won't cover that really today, but there's other sessions going on where we will talk through how you can link your data models back to information that's captured and stored within Microsoft Purview and Calibra. Now, in terms of how we're kind of working with the modeling solution and what we can gain from this, just got a couple of slides to kind of outline some ways in which we might do this. So if we look at the source for our metadata, which typically we might call data assets or data sources, this can be in a number of different formats. This slide is quite simple. It's just really highlighting databases, flat files, but we could also have things that are maybe NoSQL databases. We obviously will have things that are stored on premise in traditional database engines, or we might have things that are stored in cloud with things like Delta tables on formats and standards such as Databricks and so on. But with all of these, it's very useful for us to be able to look at how we can explore the structure of this information. So when we're talking about interrogating these data assets from a data modeling perspective, we're not concerned with looking at the data itself, i.e. we're not looking at the contents, but we're looking at the structure. And typically that gets represented in the form of a physical data model, which will probably reflect the structure of the data asset itself quite directly. So we'll have tables, we'll have columns or their equivalents in hierarchical or NoSQL databases, and we'll be able to work with those in terms of the physical data model. We then may also kind of take that and extend it further into more of a logical representation. A logical model is usually a little bit more abstract, and it may also be a little bit more friendly in terms of things like we may translate the names of tables and how they're captured in the database. So we may have a table like we have here called CMPY with those particular columns. In a logical layer, that might basically come across and be extended out to represent more meaningful business names using things like naming standard templates, which are features of modeling solutions. And then, as we mentioned actually on the previous slide very briefly, we may then also then look at how that could be linked back into more of a high-level business term definition as well, where we're really looking to understand just how these things interact with the business. We can look at this in a slightly different way as well, because often in a larger organization in particular, we're actually going to end up where we have multiple instances of these kind of project level or domain level data models representing multiple data assets, as we're seeing at the bottom of the slide here. And you typically have both physical and logical representations of those. But what we may also want to do is bring those up almost to more of an enterprise logical model as well, where we're having common definitions, more of a template definition across the business. This is what we'd like a structure of a customer to be stored as. Now, it may not directly map these in terms of a one-for-one customer always stores the same information. It may store slightly different information. It may have slightly different structures depending on the needs of individual projects or parts of the business. What is important though is to be able to have some form of lineage and some form of mapping across these, so that I can understand that this customer table that I have here is in some way related through and mapped back to this customer definition at my enterprise logical model, and perhaps then back to this customer definition in my overall business data catalog or business glossary. So we may be going from the high level definition of customer. Customer is someone who purchases a product or a service from us, to a more detailed breakdown of the structure at a logical layer, right down to the physical model, which is mapping the actual tables and columns that we're storing as well. So that's kind of the typical way in which a lot of organizations will structure their use of an enterprise modeling tool. And really they're looking to achieve a number of things from that. But what we're really going to focus on today is how we start to perhaps be able to bring in some of these definitions. So if we have got these different data assets in different formats, how can we bring them into a modeling tool such as ERStudio Enterprise? So I'm going to start drilling into that in the next few slides. So we're going to take a look at the different ways in which we can import that metadata structure. Within ERStudio Enterprise, there's really four main ways of bringing this information in. I've got them listed on the slide there, but there's what we call reverse engineering. I'll talk about each of these points in a bit more detail as we go through the rest of the presentation. And what we'll also do is drop out of the slides and do a short demonstration of how these may look and how these may operate as well as we go through. But reverse engineering allows us to connect to a data source directly. So this could be a standard relational format like an Oracle or a Microsoft SQL Server or a whole range of others. We're able to read a lot of detailed information, possibly using different options as well as we go through that to pull in a very rich set of metadata from it. So typically reverse engineering is probably the way in which we're going to get the richest layer in terms of metadata to populate into the data model. If we don't have the ability to connect directly to the data source itself or to the data asset, maybe security or the ways in which infrastructures are configured, the other option we have as well is to import this directly from a file extract. So this could be a SQL extract from, again, a standard relational database, or it could also be other formats as well. It could be something like a JSON type format. Again, I'll explain what that might look like in a moment. ERStudio also provides a couple of other options, and these are a little bit different to the first two in what they're looking to achieve and what they're doing. First option we have is something that we call the MetaWizard bridges. Now, the MetaWizard bridges can connect to a wide range of different technologies and cover not just data structures, but also other flat file formats, specific systems like Salesforce, for example, and a whole range of other technologies. Typically, they'll be able to read that information in and create corresponding objects into the data model for us. Okay, and as I say, we'll drill into each of those in just a moment. The final option, ERStudio provides a macro scripting language, which is built around an API. And this actually allows us to build our own almost custom integrations as well. We supply a whole set of standard macros that you can take and work with, but you can also kind of tweak, develop, and create your own macro code, which can then read and write to specific customized formats as well. Okay, so those are really the four options that we're going to take a look at in a bit more detail today. So, reverse engineering. So with reverse engineering, there's a discrete list of platforms that we support that you're able to connect to. And I won't go into it today, but as well as doing that reverse engineering to bring the metadata in, we're also able to make changes to it, and we're able to forward engineer to generate corresponding SQL script out again. Got a screenshot of the little start of the wizard here, but to be honest, let's go through a little demonstration of that in just a second. But as I said, we can connect to a wide range of these different data sources using various different authentication methods to do this, and then various options will follow that through. So let me actually, before I do the little demonstration, let me do one more slide. Very similar to the reverse engineering is the ability to import directly from a file such as a SQL file or a JSON file. So typically these will give us again a rich source of metadata. We can specify the format of it, and again ERStudio will read that in and bring it into the data model as a series of objects for us to work with. So let's just drop out of PowerPoint for a second. And let's jump across here. So on those links that I've got embedded in the slides, and again, just a reminder, if you kind of were a little bit later joining, the slides are available as a download in the handout area from GoToWebinar here, so you can pull those down. So you've got all those URLs and other web links that are embedded in there, so you don't have to try and copy them down. So on our online DocWiki page, you'll find a list of the supported database platforms that we have for reverse engineering. And there's quite a wide range of them, as I said, from traditional database servers such as Microsoft SQL Server through to NoSQL like Mongo, and also other newer formats perhaps like Databricks as well. So what does this look like inside ERStudio? Well, let's start off. So this is our ERStudio Data Architect tooling. So I'm going to go to the Tools menu at the top here. I'm going to select the wizard which says Reverse Engineer. So it'll pop up the little box, and it's got a wizard here which will guide me through the different steps. I've got a SQL Server running here on my my virtual machine, so I'm going to connect to that one for the demo today. What you'll see as well, a lot of the wizards in ERStudio, this is a little feature I really like. There's something called Quick Launch. Once you've filled in these settings once, when you get to the final page of the wizard, you can save them away, and then you can just recall them back again. So if I say reverse engineer SQL Server, it will then populate it with the settings that I used last time around. And they will carry through all these next subsequent screens. So I could browse to the actual online databases that are available on my SQL Server instance. I'm going to select this one because I happen to know it's not too big. And again, I could select other objects, but just to make it go through nice and quickly in the demo, I'm just going to take my tables. This will vary a little bit depending on the database platform, but we can then continue. It's going to bring in these 6 different tables it's identified. And again, I've got options here to allow me to exclude and include some of these. So the nice thing with the reverse engineering is there's lots of options and lots of ways that I can tailor what it is that I'm bringing in. There's also more options here. If referential integrity isn't declared, I can ask ERStudio to try and infer primary keys or foreign keys based on naming and various other standards. I can also ask it to do some clever things with view dependencies. This is a fairly new feature we've just added in. If you're working on an older version of ERStudio, if we tick this box, it will actually interrogate any embedded JSON structures in the database. So things like Oracle, latest version, SQL Server, Snowflake, and a few others. You can actually embed columns as JSON columns with embedded structures in them. We can now actually interrogate those and bring those in. And again, a bit more. Nice thing here, naming standard template. This enables me to do that mapping that I mentioned briefly on the slideshow. I'll explain what that will look like as we go through, but let's just go ahead and do it. So it's connecting to my data source, and it's going to read it through. It's generated both a logical and a physical model for me. And it's got, as you can see here on the left-hand side, it's got my entities, it's got all my attributes. Just compact a few of those down. All my key definitions, everything's all been brought in. So a very rich set of metadata. If I open up the objects themselves, again, all the different attributes are defined here with data type information. It's read that in. If I've got things like extended properties, depending on the platform, they will all come in. Definitions can come in as well, based on comments and other things stored in the database. So reverse engineering gives you a very, very rich set of the metadata coming in, and it's also quite easy to use. Now, there's lots of other things we can do with the reverse engineering once we use it, in terms of going back and monitoring changes and generating scripts and so on. But I'm just going to leave it at that for today, because we're really focusing on the import here. I'll point you to some other resources where it will talk a bit more around things like the forward engineering and comparisons and identifying differences and so on as well. But it's created a logical and a physical model for me, which look very, very similar. And at the physical model, if we look behind the object properties here, you'll see it actually gives us even more detail. So we'll actually see things like the DDL script behind that table with the different columns defined and so on. Okay. So the other thing we can do from the tools menu here as well is there's a little option here which says import, or import file to be precise. What I'm going to do from this one is I'm just going to say let's import directly from the file. So I could select a SQL file. So if I exported some DDL directly from my SQL Server or my Snowflake and have it locally, I could bring that in. Just to do something a bit different, I want to select a JSON file. So I've got one here already, which has just got a few items of JSON kind of defined in it. I'm selecting the Toilet Platform as a JSON instance, but you'll see we don't get quite the rich kind of wizard that we do with the reverse engineering. We'll see in a moment, it still gives us some really good information, but we don't get quite the control we have over what it's bringing in here. But let's go ahead and say OK. And it's gone ahead and it's done that for me. And I just tidy those lines up a little bit and do a, no, let's not do that one. Let's do that one. So I've imported that JSON file. Now, as you probably know, JSON is kind of a hierarchical structure as a file. So you might be a bit surprised to see it representing this with these different object breakdowns. What ERStudio does is actually quite clever with JSON. From a logical perspective, it will actually translate's probably the wrong word, but will represent it at a logical model layer, very similar to a standard logical ER diagram. So these are called containment relationships. So it's saying things like a book could contain a chapter, and a chapter could contain a section within it. Now, if I look at the physical model that's been brought in here, it looks a little bit different. So let's just bring that up. We can probably just zoom into that a little bit as well. So now we see it is actually representing the physical model as basically a file. Yeah? It's hierarchical. So we talked about having a chapter with sections behind it. Nice thing here in the UI is I can compact these things down and extend them up again. But now if I look at this particular object from the JSON file, it's basically brought in, click over here, all the different field definitions that it identified along with their types. And you'll see it's brought in some of these where they are as part of an object definition or an array. So things like that, the book contains chapters, the chapters contain sections and so on. It's identified those here. And now instead of SQL code behind it, we're actually seeing the JSON images behind it. And we can, again, once we have this ingested into the data model, I can start working with it. I can add new additional structures, new additional objects in here. I can add more of those containment relationships. And then again, we could extract and export the JSON file directly to update the actual underlying JSON structure that we have as well. But again, that forward engineering is a story for another day, as it were. Okay, so that's the first two little options on our list that we had in that slide. We've done the reverse engineering from a live data source, and we've done the import, in this case, from a JSON file, which was stored on my disk there. So let's just have a look at a couple of other things we could do. So let me just jump back here. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is a slightly different option in ERStudio, and this is what we call the MetaWizard bridges. Now I'll explain in a bit more detail in a moment, but the other thing I'll just point out is that it's the ERStudio Enterprise license, which has the full capability of import bridges from the MetaWizard. There is a subset included with the lower editions, but we're really looking at Enterprise here. And again, we'll take a look at the supported platforms in just a moment. But the MetaWizard bridges get broken down to three main areas. There's a whole set of import bridges, and these can target things like specific file formats. They could be proprietary files, or they could be standard-based. It can target things which are looking to be implemented on SQL platforms. As I mentioned, Salesforce example is one. And it can also try and read in and bring in information from other tool sets as well. Now, the second set of bridges go the other way. They export information out. Now, these are a bit more limited in what they're capable of doing, but again, I'll explain more of that in just a moment. And the final set of the MetaWizard bridges are what we call data lineage import, or ETL bridge imports. And as well as bringing in the objects from certain technologies, these will actually reverse engineer and produce something called a visual data lineage diagram, or a data movement diagram. And again, I think I've just got a couple of slides with a couple of screenshots there. Sorry, I can't control my mouse today. So I may, for example, ask the MetaWizard bridge. I could select the Salesforce bridge, where it will connect to a Salesforce instance. It'll ask me for details of the URL to connect to, user, password, keys, etc. And it will then go through and it will generate a data model for me. I've got the data model in ERStudio. I'm not going to run through that one because it will take quite a while to parse through the kind of, I think, 1,500 tables that we have in our sample Salesforce implementation. But we can connect to things like Salesforce. And then we can also connect to things, as I mentioned, like these data lineage sources. So what I'm probably going to show today is connecting to something from Informatica. I'll explain what else we can do. But from here, it would then actually generate these types of diagrams as well. We'll have a look at those as we go through. And then finally, we can also import from other tool sets. So things like a Power Designer, if you're a Power Designer user, especially with what appears to be the limited kind of ongoing support for Power Designer as a tool set. We're talking to a lot of people at the moment who are looking to migrate from this implementation across to other tools. ERStudio has an ability to read physical logical models from Power Designer and bring those in as well. Okay. So again, I'm just going to jump across to my environment here. And I'm just going to go to just going to create a blank model just so we can see there's nothing in there already. Just out of interest, if you're kind of curious about what these things may look like, this is the Salesforce model that I brought in. In fact, one of my colleagues brought this in. I shouldn't take credit for it. But this is a subset of the Salesforce model. So here we've got kind of what we call a submodel, which is just breaking down that particular area. I've got other submodels in place there as well, showing different parts of it. And the main model itself will be very, very large. I'll show you another way of looking at that as we go through the the rest of the demo. So Salesforce model, that was brought in via the bridge, and I'll show you how we do that in just a moment. Just while we'll run here, I mentioned that there's 3 types of bridges. This is a list of the import bridges, the export bridges, and then the data lineage bridges. So what we're going to do first is we'll take a look at a import from a data lineage bridge. As I say, I think these are quite nice in what they provide. I'm going to use Informatica Power Center, but it will come in from other tool sets like IBM, SQL Server, SSIS, a lot of customers using that, and also things like Talend as well. But you'll see, other things that we get requests for quite a lot. Can we import a Parquet format file to get the structure? Yeah, there's a little bridge that will bring that in for us. Again, all sorts of things related. The ones that are highlighted in bold, these are the subset that you get with the basic license of ERStudio. You need the full enterprise version to get all of the other bridges included that we're seeing on this page here. Okay, so you do get a subset of those to try out and play with. Okay, so let's jump back here and we'll go to my model there. And again, I'm just going to go to my little import option. And this time I'm going to say import from external metadata. So this will fire up the underlying engine for those import bridges. It does run as a separate process, so it sometimes takes it just a few seconds to start that up and kind of spawn it off into that process. But once it's running, it really looks like another part of the ERStudio. So here we go. I've actually got my Informatica Power Center selected, but up at the top here, this is the drop down. This is where we see all those other kind of types of imports that we can do. So we can just scroll up, select the ones that are of interest to us. I can then select the particular file. Oh, down here, by the way, it's probably quite small on your screen, but there's some documentation around the bridges. There's also this available on the websites as well, but it will tell you any restrictions or what's required in order for it to work with the import bridge. All included there. So I'm going to say, well, let's read in this Informatica file that I have, which is actually XML format. So I'll just grab that and then give me a few options. I'm actually going to say, I'm going to create this one as a dimensional model. ERStudio supports different notations, so you can import things just as a standard relational or as a dimensional model. And the other one that's quite interesting, we won't have time to do anything really with it today, but this option here, summary lineage, I'm going to go ahead and just use the default one, which is target table driven. And you'll see down here, there's a little description of them all. So mine's basically going to use the target table. So if you think about sort of Informatica, if it's an ETL job, it's moving things from source tables, it's got some transformations or some processes, and then there's some target tables where the movement's going to take place to. Mine's going to be based around those target tables as the focus of the diagram, but you can also do it as source table driven, the transformation or activity driven, and even if you want specific columns that you're interested in, you can redo them that way as well. So you could come back and rerun the wizard in multiple times to get the different views. Sorry, it's just telling me that I did this earlier when I was just checking everything was working. So I'm just going to overwrite it. So it'll start the import process. So it's just going to work its way through. Just so you're aware, sometimes this import bridge, it does rely on some kind of open source and third-party libraries. Sometimes it will go off and attempt to download an updated version, so there's a bit of a pause and it says it's kind of downloading. That's what's going on there. But once we're done, it kind of just finishes through. If there's any problems, you get quite detailed information in here. You can save that to a log file, but then I'll just click finish. It's just telling us here that it's created that in a format that's not quite the very latest. That's just because the import bridge itself, it's still working on something like 20.5 format. We're up to 20.9 is the latest version, so yeah, I'm going to upgrade it to my latest format. So the import's complete. Close that off. So it's brought in a number of physical models that it's found from there, but I'm not really that interested in those. I could have a look at them if I so desire. We could just maybe do a little circular layout, so you'll see it's got different tables it's found in there. But more interesting, I think, with these this import is that we can go to this data lineage tab, and over here, and I'm trying to remember now, is it that one? Or is it that one? It could be that one. If I lay this one out. So this is now showing us a set of data movement rules. So if I just select my little zoom icon here a little bit, we'll zoom into a couple of those. Don't worry too much about the detail, but this one's now organized so that it has a number of source tables. So it's found these different source tables that have been defined. There's a target table here. So it's obviously taking some specific columns from the source, doing something with them, and then moving them over here. And if we look into the transformation, first thing we'll see is that the code itself has been populated in here. If we did have some nice comments in that file as well from Informatica about what it's doing, those have come through. And then there's my list of input columns and my list of output columns. And again, I can go through and tweak these. So from each table, it's telling me it's taking the customer ID from the customer table, it's taking the payment ID from the customer payment, etc., etc. And then it's moving those across as outputs, maybe to another more business or company-wide data warehouse where we're going to use that for reporting or whatever else we're doing. So it's representing that in there as well. So that's quite nice, the import bridge. As I say, for those specific ETL type toolings, it brings in and generates that movement rule for you as well. Oh, and before I forget, of course, although I'm doing these as discrete kind of imports, I'm doing like the import from Informatica, I'm doing import from a JSON file. ERStudio's got some really powerful capabilities called compare and merge. So if I then want to start creating a new data model or merging the data models together, taking table objects from one to the other, reusing them, that's all very, very easy to do within ERStudio as well. Okay, quickly, I'm just going to do one more import, I think, here. And again, I'm just going to click on an empty model so you can see we're starting kind of blank. And we'll do one final little import on the bridge. Okay, so I'm just taking a sip of water there as well. Waiting that. Okay, so this time I'm actually going to scroll down a bit and we're going to do a hard designer import from a physical data model. So I'll just try to do a few different things in the session. We brought in like a JSON file. We then brought in an ETL type tool. I'll now bring in something from another modeling tool as well. So you can see the different kind of use cases for different types of metadata that we could bring in. So I'm going to browse. Again, we've got all the descriptions here about what it can do. There's some little options. First thing I need to do is go and find my Power Designer file. And I just need to navigate to it, which I put in my little webinar folder. I've got a couple of Power Designer physical data model files here. I'll take that one, it's got a few more tables in. So let's just say, yeah. The rest I'll just take as defaults. I'll say, yeah, that's all okay. It'll then go through and there's another page of options. Again, I could create a dimensional model. This time I'll maybe just do it as a straight relational. Some options around encoding and what else we want to do with it. Again, I did this earlier, so I'm just going to say, yeah, let's create a new one. And it'll run through the import bridge. again, we get quite detailed information, as I mentioned. If there's any warnings and things, we can go in and take a look at what those may be. If I click the finish button and say yes, close that down. Now this was a Power Designer physical model that I brought in, so it hasn't mapped that to my logical model here at all. It's instead created an ERStudio physical model, and we can maybe just apply another layout to that one, bring it all together a bit. So it's got different tables it's found with relationships. The grey one is a view that's been found in the Power Designer model, and that's a stored procedure or a function. And there was a little kind of comment box on the model as well from Power Designer. And as we expect, it's brought in the information that was in the data model. So we've got the column definitions with the data types coming through. So it will read the database platform from Power Designer that was targeted by a physical model and map that across to the equivalent in ERStudio. I can't remember if I've got any definitions or anything in place here. Oh yeah, so it's brought in my little comments and definitions from the Power Designer model as well. And again, we could then start to work on that. Okay. So we've seen quite a few of the different bridge features there. As I said, we can also do things like a Parquet file and lots of other technologies, but we've seen a few different types of the bridge operating. So last little bit, I'm just going to talk through. And if we go to here, just a little word on the macros. So the macros are a little bit different from the other options we've seen. The other options are pretty much kind of pre-built import capabilities. The macros are really more samples that you can then take and really tweak and work on and build up yourself. So a lot of our customers do use these a lot, where they do have specific requirements or specific formats that they want to import or export information to. There's a whole set of information on these on the websites again. Other thing that I would mention here and highlight, on our ERStudio.com resource center, there's a macros location. And one of my colleagues, William, who's very, very good, a bit of a wizard with the macros, he often posts up little papers and little sample code snippets explaining how to do additional things with the macros and the API scripts as well. So if you're looking at the macros, that's a good thing to take a look at. They can do all sorts of things. So these are the standard sample macros that come with the product. Okay, so there's things like imports, exports, which is kind of our focus today. So we'll run this one in just a moment. There's also things around alignment, colorization, and so on. And there's a full little development environment in ERStudio with debug capabilities in there as well. So let's just take a little look at the macro here. Okay, so again, let's just create a new blank model. And I'm going to go across to the macro tab here. So here's my list of macros. Now, this one, what I've got to showcase this one is I've got an Excel spreadsheet which has got a lot of information in. It's got entity names, table names, so that's a logical name, physical name, attributes and columns, the data types, any definitions, etc. All sorts of information that are part of this Excel spreadsheet. So this might have been exported or been built from another type of system, another type of environment, and I might want to try and bring some of this into ERStudio. So from here, what I'm going to do is say, let's import those from Excel. And I'm just going to load up my little macro editor here. Okay. So with our sample macros, what you'll usually see is there's a little bit of description and comments at the start. So it's saying that this one will import entities and columns. So it is just entities and columns for this one. It doesn't know anything about relationships. But again, that's another macro we could build or another macro we could take. It's going to read from an Excel spreadsheet with these following columns, entity table, etc., etc. So what we've just seen. So I'm going to say, okay, let's go ahead and do that. So this is my macro running. So you can have little user interfaces defined in the macro scripting. I can bring up a file box, file dialog, and this is my little folder that I'm using for all the stuff we're doing today. Let's say import. Now, the reason it's sometimes quite nice to have the little editing window up in the background is as it's doing things, it'll just show you the status there. Obviously, you could add in a little counter there to say how many things you're doing. But there we go, it's finished it, and it's done the import. Maybe I'll just pop that down out of the way. And we could now go back to our data model. And again, we could apply a little layout here. It doesn't really matter which one we apply here. And let's zoom in a little bit. So from that macro Excel kind of spreadsheet, from that Excel spreadsheet, the macro's read all that information, and it's actually produced a range of different tables with the columns behind it. And again, if we drill into this, we're going to see all the good stuff that's included, all the data types, everything else that's in there. And I could start working with it. I could start adding in relationships, building it up, whatever I want to do with it, and then eventually generating SQL code from it as well to actually implement that in there. Okay, so macros really powerful. And as I say, there's a whole set that we supply as standard. You can go in, you can see the source code. It's a bit like VBA in terms of the language that we have built in there. If you have a look at some of these, you'll see the UI being brought up. You'll also see us checking for file existing, and then eventually you see there it's connecting to Excel, the Excel application. It's then opening the particular file name up and then passing through it and bringing it in. Okay, so macros really good if you've got custom formats and custom things that you want to do a little bit of work on. And they're not just for kind of importing information, they can do all sorts of other things as well. So last little section just to finish off with. The other thing that we find more and more, as we're talking to a lot of our users now as well, is obviously in the past it's been great to be able to do these things in terms of capturing the metadata, bringing it into ERStudio, seeing all that rich information around it. But also more and more is that capability to be able to really publish and share it a little bit more easily as well. So if you think right back to the start of this little session, I had a little slide which showed some of the back-end services where I said we can also actually generate things like HTML-based content from the data models. So that's what we call the ERStudio team server. So literally for just the last couple of minutes, let's have a look at some of those models that I had in there. So let's jump back here again. And if I just go over here. So I'm now running just a web browser, and it's connecting to my my machine with the team server software installed on it. Here's my little kind of explorer view. So there's my structure of all my different data models. And this is our little webinar we've been on today with the import metadata. So we've got things like that Salesforce model we were looking at. So as I said, we looked at this little submodel. There's a little submodel there. We start getting higher up, it gets a lot busier with all the different entities and objects from that Salesforce reverse engineer that I did. We could also see things like the not just the standard ER diagrams, but also, let me scroll that up a little bit. This was one that I imported from Informatica. So I've got my kind of little data movement type diagrams. And if we click on these, it will actually take us through and render that in a HTML format. So I can zoom in a little bit there, scroll around it, And with all these, I can also select them. They're all clickable, so I can drill into the detail behind this transformation. See all my input columns, all my output columns, etc., and work with it in that way. And I think we showed one of those, yeah, and one of those. And the final bit I'll just show as well is within this interface, it can also link up to things like business terms and business glossaries. So again, if we have got information that's maybe stored in Purview or Calibra, we can synchronize that into ERStudio. And I just have a look at my little employee business term. So this now is not part of the data model. It's part of my kind of business term catalog. So very high level definition. This is what an employee is. Okay, that's quite nice. Let's just kind of have a little navigate around here and maybe look if there's a hierarchy. Okay, so an employee could be a person. Parties right at the top. Let's have a look at that one. And we'll see kind of more of the ontology or taxonomy around the structure of that and how it all fits together. And then eventually, if we want to, we could then see how employee as a business term relates back to different data models, logical model, physical model, and click through it that way. Okay, so all the information that we do capture inside ERStudio with those different import methods that we just spoke about, they can all now be kind of shared, made available to really anyone who has just a web browser. So if they just want to browse it, search it, and so on, they can then get access to that in a very easy way. So I'm just going to bring up my little summary slide, and then I'm going to take a little look to see if we've got any questions that haven't been answered as well in the background. But what we've looked at in the session today, the different options for bringing information into ERStudio and creating objects within the data model. So we started off with that reverse engineering, importing from a file, the MetaWizard bridges, and then the macros. So these are kind of, I guess, the kind also structured in the order where you'll typically get the most information, the most detailed information, and have the most options to be able to choose from when you're bringing in, selecting the metadata you want to bring in. Macros, as I say, is a bit different because it's really a script that you can pretty much do whatever you want with. But lots of ways you can bring information from a huge different range of different data sources into ERStudio. Oh, sorry, my mouse really doesn't like working very well today. Let's just go to the end there. So again, some other useful resources. As I say, you can download this slide deck with the links in it from the handout section on GoToWebinar. Resource Center is great. Have a look on the events page up there. There's lots more of these webinars running. I think we've definitely got some coming up around Calibra and Purview integration that some of my colleagues are doing, and the main online documentation pages as well. So in fact, if I just bring that back up again here, I think, where are we? Oh yeah. Just while I'm talking, I'll just kind of bring that up on screen there. So yeah, so the ERStudio.com events, that's our one we've just done today. There's a few other things that are going on as well. So some good ones here around kind of dealing with trusted data, ones we've done in the past, around Medallion, which one of my colleagues Angela did, which was really good about Medallion architecture design, and more coming up as well. So do have a look at those and see if there's anything that looks to be of interest. We're coming to the end of our time, and I have just looked through, and I think my colleagues have done an incredible job of answering questions as we've gone along. So I can't see any that are left unanswered. So that's all good stuff. If you do think of anything else, obviously you get in touch with your If you've got existing licenses, get in touch with your account manager here at Idera. They'll be really pleased to help you. There's contact links upon the websites that I've given you. There's also a little QR code there that you can scan as well. And again, this was recorded, so that's a question we normally get asked. You will get a link sent around you as well with the recording. So if there's anything you want to review or just go over again, that'll be available to you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say thanks everyone for attending, and we're just about bang on time. So hope that was interesting and useful, and we'll maybe see you at one of the future webinar events as well. Thanks everyone, have a good day.